morning, everyone. My name is Diane Lee and I'm from Delicious Consulting Vietnam, LLC. I'm here to talk to you this morning about endings, and which always begin with beginnings and move on into endings. So that's what we're here to talk to you about this morning. Thank you. All right, so it's always very good to start with a quote, I find, with these kinds of things. So this is something I found which was really quite pertinent. You only grow by coming to the end of something and by beginning something else. So endings and beginnings are very much hand in hand, and you can't necessarily have one without the other. So I want to talk to you about my many endings before I came to Vietnam, and also some endings while I was here, in terms of what actually happened to me and why I ended up forming a company here. And it actually came out of many and varied endings. So in 2016, I left my job in Australia. I was very bored, very a little bit kind of stalled in my career. Couldn't find a way forward. I was working for the South Australian government, and it was very clear to me that I really didn't have a future there. So after getting paid out from my job, which was exciting because that meant that I didn't necessarily have to worry about money as such, I decided to come to Vietnam and to volunteer. So just to backtrack a little bit, my first overseas trip ever was to Vietnam in 2010. So I finished my stint as a parent, so I ended, I guess, being a parent, and decided to travel overseas. And the first country that I came to, as I said, was to Vietnam. And I was here for 2 weeks, and part of that stint ended with me coming to Hanoi and eating at a Koto restaurant. And I was so enamoured with the work there that I thought, one day I will come back, I will volunteer, and I will spend more time here in Vietnam. I absolutely loved Vietnam. I found it one of the most difficult things I'd ever done, because I actually travelled here on my own. It was difficult, it was rewarding, it was challenging, it was everything that a first overseas trip should be. And it was pretty awesome to actually have the wherewithal when I got paid out to be able to come back. So I applied to Koto for a volunteer role, was very excited to have been accepted. So I left Australia in October 2016, spent 1 month in Bali doing a writer's retreat, and then going to Penang for a week, and then coming to Vietnam. So I ended up staying with Koto for 1 year, and during that time I was privy to many opportunities. I ended up writing for Word magazine, which was pretty awesome, and that was the start of working probably in the travel industry. So I ended up working for quite a few big travel companies here, doing web content, web writing, English editing, that sort of thing. So there was a lot of stuff happening in that space as well. So there was a lot of opportunity here for a native English-speaking writer-editor. And given that my background was an English teacher, not that I taught here, but also my master's degree was communications management, it meant that a lot of the skills that I had in Australia were very, very pertinent and very useful here in Vietnam, not so much in Australia, which was quite interesting. But I did that for a couple of years. And in 2019, after a couple of other endings, which I'll go into in a minute, I started my company, Delicious Consulting Vietnam. Now, the almost endings that I had in 2017 was that I nearly died in Cao Bang. So I was not going to die that day, but I could have died. I was actually on a press trip for Word magazine, and they sent me to Cao Bang to cover rural and economic development there. Go hiking, they said. It will be fun, they said. It was not fun. There was no information about the trip. I was completely underprepared, even though I tried to get information out. So we were hiking in jungle, and unfortunately, because it was a very kind of new initiative that I was on, there was no exit strategy. So there were a few of us that were really, really struggling trekking in the jungle, and we couldn't get out. So I literally thought I was going to die in the jungle that day. It was, I think we had to trek about 4 kilometres, and it took, 2 kilometres, took us about 4 hours to cover that 4 kilometres. We ended up making it to the road, and they had to motorcycle us out. There were no helmets. So I had to get on the back of a motorcycle when I was absolutely exhausted, near death. I cannot describe what it was like trekking through this jungle. All I could say was, no wonder the Australians and Americans lost the war. That's all I could say. No wonder they lost the war. So I ended up, they called in motorcycles to get us out. There was no helmets because it was rural. I said, I'm not getting on that without a helmet. They said, you don't get on that, you don't get out. So I went, oh, God. So anyway, I got on the back of this motorcycle and we were hiking up dirt road. The motorcycle driver lost control. I was thrown backwards and hit my head on the road. So, and I just crawled to the road. It was probably the worst experience that I ever had. I was very, very conscious about hematomas and blood clotting on the brain. The homestay where I was staying had no ice. So I think I had about 2 or 3 shots of rice wine, which is probably not a very good thing. In the end, I was okay, but I was very, very conscious that was the day that I could have actually died. And I always say almost died. So I ended up coming back to Hanoi, got x-rayed. I was okay, but I was like, oh, thank God. It was a new escape. In 2018, I think I was nearly ended with Vietnam because I had quite a few visa issues, which were really, really difficult to overcome. So I was actually planning my exit strategy from Vietnam and trying to manage my entrance back in from Bangkok. I ended up thinking that I would probably have to go to maybe Chiang Mai or somewhere like that, and I was planning my exit out of Vietnam. So that was in 2018, probably about 2 or 3 months before I started my company. I ended up coming back in, but it was very, very difficult to manage from outside. So what I would say to people, make sure your visas are in order. If they're not, then you could be in all sorts of trouble. So that's all I'm going to say about that. And in 2018, again, 2018 was a really bad year for me. I ended up in hospital for 10 days with a really toxic liver. I thought I was going to die. I didn't, thank goodness. But yeah, in 10 days in hospital it was really, really a difficult kind of time for me as well. It was over Christmas, so if you're Western, you know what it's like being in hospital over Christmas, but I was in hospital for 10 days, 3 drips a day, medication. I thought, that's it, that's the end. So nearly dying in Cao Bang, not getting back into Vietnam after visa issues, and then my toxic liver was, it was difficult. There were some endings and almost endings there. So from all of that, and particularly coming out of my visa issues, I just decided to start a company here, very bravely, I think. So if you are considering starting a company here, and probably one of the main reasons that I did do so, it just means working here is legitimate. So not that I was working illegally, I wasn't. But it just means that if you have a company, you have the legal rights of being here, you're paying tax, which I'm very, very happy to pay tax. It's not an issue for me. And it just means that life is a lot easier. You don't necessarily have to worry about the visa issues that I had to face before. So what I would say to you if you're looking at starting a company in Vietnam is that you need to find a good business lawyer. It's actually not an expensive process, but some lawyers can be very expensive. So you need to shop around and make sure that you get someone who is, quite reasonable. I know people who have been quoted $10,000 US to start a company. Maybe that's a complicated company to start, but mine was certainly not that expensive, under $2,000. So it's not an expensive process to do. If you are a foreigner, there are two ways that you can go. You can be wholly foreign owned, which means that you don't need a work permit. You actually have a work permit exemption, or you have a Vietnamese business partner, which means that you do actually need a work permit. But both situations means that you can get a temporary residence card, and you're also able to pay tax as well, which the government likes, and I have no issue paying tax. So you do need to find a good Vietnamese business partner. That is probably the one thing that foreigners struggle with if they are looking at companies here. You really do need to make sure that it's someone that you trust, and it's someone who's on the same page as you. So I've heard stories, and I certainly have friends whose businesses have kind of gone a little bit sideways because they just ended up not being on the same page around finances and strategy and all that sort of thing. So making sure that finding a Vietnamese business partner is something that will really make sure that your company will thrive. You need to decide on a business name, and your lawyer will actually check the register for that. I decided on Delicious Consulting, and I actually had to add the Vietnam. So I just wanted Delicious Consulting, but my lawyer said I had to add the Vietnam there as well, which is fine with me. But that's Delicious Consulting is kind of a thing that's followed me across my life, so it made sense that it would be Delicious. But the lawyer will check the register and make sure that name is available and that there won't be any issues using it in Vietnam. You'll need to decide on your business lines. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. So there are many varied things that you can do in Vietnam with regard to business. So, for example, my business line is management consulting, but I do marketing, communications and that sort of thing. But also in my business lines, I have software development. I have retail. So anything you think that you could or want to do, put it in your business line, because if you want to change it later, it will be expensive. Anytime you make any change to your business, you're looking at least $200. So think of everything that you could or would or might like to do, and that will be a useful thing to do. So think about your business lines. You'll need to decide your business address. Now, this is really important because the tax department, particularly if you're a foreigner or foreign-owned, will actually come to your business address to make sure that you are not a ghost company. So you need to have your signage on the office outside, and so that the tax department will know that you are real and you're not just faking a work permit or something like that, or a temporary residence card. You can actually have a couple of working addresses. So you can have a business registered address. So I have one address registered in Time City, but I also have a working address registered in Tay Ho. So you can have two addresses registered. I would suggest that think about where you want to work. I didn't even think about it when I started my company, so then I actually had to change the address and then had to pay an extra $250 to get all my business certifications updated. So that's something to consider as well. So you need to make sure that you have your signage. Basically, the government or the taxation want to know that there's someone working, there's a laptop and there's a sign. So even though you may be freelance and you can work from a cafe, don't care. There needs to be signage and there needs to be a laptop evidence. So that's kind of how it works. So you need to also pay in your charter capital. So charter capital is the amount that you start your business with. So it needs to be an amount where the government is satisfied that it's not just a fake company. So if you're looking at starting with $1,000 it probably won't be enough. So depending on the kind of business that you want, I started mine with around 4K Australian dollars. Government was very happy with that. I probably could have got away with maybe 3, but 4.5 is fine. But the good thing about using your charter capital is that you can draw on that afterwards. So my charter capital now is going on my wages while I'm getting started up. So that's not an issue there. You can actually, you don't put it in the bank and then just let it sit there. It is actually usable money. I know a friend of mine bought a motorbike with his charter capital and all against the company. So it's usable money. It just doesn't sit there. You'll need to also, particularly if you're going down the work permit track, the lawyer will lodge a permission to employ a foreigner. So basically, even though it's your company, you still need permission from the Labor Department to employ yourself. So that needs to happen as well, but the lawyer will handle all that, and then from there you'll end up getting your work permit, so it shouldn't be an issue. But you'll need to make sure that you have that permission for when you do your contract, because you also have to have a contract with yourself so that you can pay you. Yeah, it's weird, but it's kind of how it works. So I had to do my own contract. I signed my contract, stamped my contract, all me. So it's quite an interesting thing to do. So lodge an approval to hire a foreign if you're foreign. You'll need to hire an accountant. That is the first person you should hire. When I first got here, and I saw people were starting companies, I thought, why are people hiring accountants? Shouldn't marketing be the first people that you would hire? But no, an accountant is the first person that everyone should hire because things are so complex and complicated, and there's so much paperwork to put into place, and there's so many forms to fill out, and particularly if you're foreign and you don't speak the language, it's a minefield. So finding a good accountant is probably the number one thing that you do. And if you're foreign, you need to find someone who speaks English. If you have a Vietnamese business partner and a Vietnamese accountant, it's actually really difficult because you just don't know what's going on. So if you have someone who speaks English, it just makes life a whole lot easier. And they're very, very difficult to find. So if you find one, hang on to them and treat them very well. So that's cool. When you get your, so your accountant will also take care of your tax. She'll take, mine's a she, she or he will take care of your reporting. He or she will take care of your payroll. He or she will take care of your invoicing and also your HR stuff as well. So accountants actually do a myriad of tasks. Going back to finding a Vietnamese business partner, what you can do if you don't want to have a Vietnamese business partner, you can be wholly foreign owned. But my recommendation is to find a very, very good Vietnamese business assistant, executive assistant, so someone who speaks very, very good English, who can deal with immigration, who can deal with taxation, who can deal with licensing, and also an accountant. So they're probably the two Vietnamese people that you do need if you want to go it on your own. So that's what I would advise. But if you have a Vietnamese business partner, you should be okay with that. You'll need to put in your annual business tax, this one here. You'll actually get that with your business registration certificate. If you're Western, you won't be able to read it, so you'll just sit it there until the tax department come to knock on your door and ask where your signage is and where your laptop is and why you haven't paid your business tax fee for the year. So make sure that you pay that. Otherwise, you'll be in all sorts of trouble and they'll actually threaten you with deregistering your company. So that needs to be paid. But if you hire your accountant straight off, that shouldn't be an issue. She'll actually pay that for you, or he will pay that for you. So yeah, it's a little bit scary when the tax department comes around knocking on your door and your business partner goes, "The tax department's here." And you're, "Oh my God, okay, what do we do? So it's a little bit scary, but it's okay. Just pay that and it's fine. You do need to open a business bank account. Some banks are easier than others. So some banks require basically every piece of documentation you've had in your life since you were born. Some banks are happy with just your company charter and passport, and that's okay. So shop around. It's just that some banks are much easier to open business accounts than with others. So your accountant may be able, hopefully you've hired one, will be able to give you advice in that particular area. If you are in a service industry, please make sure you have service agreement templates in place, because otherwise you will be in a world of trouble in terms of actually negotiating contracts. Everything will be in favour of probably the person that you're doing business with, and you'll end up probably walking away leaving money on the table. So make sure when you're doing your service agreements that you have things like cancellations, that you have things like late payments, that you have things like non-refundable deposits. Make sure that your service agreements are watertight, because otherwise it's just really, really painful. And that's not just here in Vietnam, it's across the board in the world anyway. So one thing I've learned is that you do need to make sure that your service agreements are firmly in place. But your lawyer will be able to help you with that. So my business lawyer, has actually helped with changing the company address, service agreements. There's a whole lot of stuff that they can actually help you with. So if you do find a good lawyer, just make sure that you stick with them, because then they've got kind of the history of the company as well. It kind of makes it a little bit easier to deal with. And then it's a matter of finding your clients and selling your products, which is very, very interesting to do here in Vietnam. So I tend to work mainly in the travel industry. So a lot of my clients come because they need English web content or English editing or something like that. But I'm also in the process of trying to educate my clients as well around the joys of a marketing plan and why it's so necessary. So that's been fun. So I probably lose clients because a lot of my clients aren't interested, or potential clients aren't interested in the services that I have to offer, which is also quite interesting. So you have to balance it up with, getting the income, but also providing a good solid service to your clients where you're not actually doing a disservice, if that makes sense. This is it. The end is never the end. It's always the beginning of something. Always. Yeah. So that's my talk.
Thank you.
Did I talk enough? Thank you. Any questions?
So what's your perspective on everything?
Everything's...
Is it a good ending or a good beginning?
Oh, gosh. You know what? The jury's still out. When I started my company, I started for a specific reason. And part of it was to stay in Vietnam. I'm not sure whether that will end up happening now. I'm doing a bit of a wait and see approach until December. So my passport expires next year. I have to get a new work permit, new temp residence card, all that sort of thing. I'm going to see how well the company does. And then I'll make up my mind as to whether I will still be here or not. So yeah, the jury's out on whether it's going to be an end or not. Yeah, I haven't quite made up my mind yet. Yeah, because the reasons I wanted to be here have actually changed. So things change, and what you think are reasons to start something are often reasons to finish something. So jury's kind of out. Yeah.
So how did you choose the name Delicious?
Delicious. Oh, that's a really good question. So basically, I've been on Twitter for many, many, many years. So my name is Diane Lee. Di Lee. And if you put a shus on the end, it's Dilicious. So I have a self-publishing company, so Delicious Publishing. I have Delicious Instagram, Delicious everything. So it made sense that I would have Delicious Consulting Vietnam, because it's very consistent with everything I've done. Yeah, basically marketing for consistency. So so that's how I came up with the name Delicious. Yeah.